about that. Constituents. So we ready to go? Great. Thanks, everybody. And I thought I'd start off today's weekly media availability by touching on some of the issues that my colleague, Minister Lisa Baer, has been working on, the Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture. It's a vast ministry, and I know some of the questions that will come up today have a bearing on the work that Lisa's been doing. And one area that I'm particularly pleased with is when it comes to amateur sport and liability during the COVID period. Many of you will know that amateur sport, minor sport, is really all about parents and volunteers keeping organizations going, whether it's soccer, baseball, lacrosse, you name it, it involves community participation. But in this COVID period, increasingly organizations, provincial sport organizations, have been hearing from insurance companies that they're not prepared to insure the volunteers, the associations, the executives of various sporting organizations. So the government has passed an order protecting all of these associations and their volunteers from any litigation as a result of COVID-19. Of course, all of these organizations will have to follow public health directions, and I know they all will. They're very anxious to do so. Various sectors have already approved their back-to-play plans, and I know that minor soccer, for example, should be up and running as of June 12th. So in order for that to happen, we needed to free up those volunteers from any fear of litigation that may arise because of COVID-19. That means that 72 different provincial sport organizations, over 4,100 local sport organizations, and over 800,000 youth and adults who participate in amateur sports will not have to worry about litigation as a result of COVID-19. I think that's great news to get people outside, to get them back engaged in sport. I very much look forward to hearing the crack of the bat at the local ball diamond down around the corner from my place in Luxton and seeing youngsters and old-timers participating in physical activity. And it's not just minor sport that, of course, got a bit of a shot in the arm because of the work of Minister Baer. Also, the Vancouver Canuck proposal for an NHL hub city has been approved by the Public Health Officer, Dr. Henry, and our government. As a result, I've written to the Prime Minister advising him that Vancouver and British Columbia would welcome the NHL as per the plan that was put together by the Vancouver Canucks, the NHL, and, of course, public health officials. Dr. Henry's reviewed the plan, and it involves a modification to the quarantine plan that would allow a team to be a family entity or a bubble. And so those individuals within that organization would stay together in one hotel. They would travel to the Rogers Arena together in private transportation. Any testing would be the responsibility of the club. No interaction with the public would take place for the 14-day quarantine period. So it is an amendment to the quarantine. It's not changing it in any meaningful way. It's only expanding the number of people within the bubble that would allow for NHL teams to come to Vancouver. Tourism Vancouver has participated in this process with the Canucks. They see a significant benefit to hotels, food, and other services if the Canucks and other teams were participating in an extended season and then a playoff platform that would involve Vancouver from beginning to end. That's an exciting thing for hockey fans. I'm going to be on my couch watching the games regardless, whether they're in Vegas or Vancouver, but I really believe that British Columbia has a great deal to offer the NHL, particularly the players. If you were bringing your family to somewhere in North America for the summer months to spend time while you played hockey, I can't think of a better place than British Columbia. The protocols would have to be followed. Public health is going to monitor this from beginning to end, but I'm excited about the proposal. Dr. Henry's excited about it, and both of us have written separately to the federal government to advance that initiative. Lastly, another significant economic driver in British Columbia is film and television. And Minister Baer has been working with Creative BC and film producers here in British Columbia and in other parts of North America to put in place a strategy for that sector to go forward with a careful reopening of that sector of the economy. It would still involve 14-day isolation periods for any talent that was coming from the United States or elsewhere, whether they be producers, directors, or front-of-camera personnel. But the vast array of professionals that we have here in British Columbia that make Vancouver and BC an ideal destination for film and television are here and ready to go, and they'll be doing so in a way that protects public health and the interests of those individuals who work in that sector. So with that introduction, I welcome any questions you may have on subjects other than hockey, lacrosse, and film.
A reminder to reporters on the line, please press *1 to queue up and unmute your mics. You won't be audible till I call your name. Our first question is from Lisa Yuzda.
Well, Premier, all your breaking news is sort of throw me for a loop for what I should ask about now. The hockey is going to thrill everyone. And I'm going to go with that, if the plan is approved, are you foreseeing, what conversations are going to be next in getting hockey actually here, getting teams here, getting games started here, getting Vancouver as the hub city?
Well, the Canucks have been instrumental in this. They've worked very collaboratively with public health officials, with ministry officials within tourism, arts, and culture. And I think it's that collaborative approach that plays well with the NHL. I've spoken personally to Gary Bettman, the commissioner. We've reached out to the Players Association again to talk about the advantages of bringing your family to British Columbia for the summer so you can conduct your profession, playing some hockey safely, and your family can also be in an environment where we've done a good job collectively in reducing the threat of COVID-19. So I believe that the NHL has to make the call now. There was concern that we were allegedly not responding rapidly enough to this question of quarantine. We're not prepared to put at risk the progress that British Columbians have made to this point in time. I've spoken with many people over the past number of months, countless Zoom calls and conference calls, and to a person, people are satisfied that British Columbians together have worked hard to make sure that our individual and our community and our provincial health is first and foremost. So we're not moving away from that for 1 second, and I think that should give more confidence to the NHL that we take this very seriously. We love our hockey in British Columbia. We welcome the NHL to come here, and it's up to them to make that choice.
The next question is from Justine Hunter.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking the question. You and other premiers are being asked to meet with tourism and travel operators to come up with a plan to restart tourism for this summer. I'm wondering if you're pushing for that national meeting, and also what you could tell those operators about when residents can travel within BC, and what's the likelihood we could actually invite tourists from other parts of the country or even other countries here this summer.
Well, I think the likelihood of us traveling inside of British Columbia is very, very high. Dr. Henry wanted to wait for 2 incubation periods to make sure that the positive results we've been seeing over the past number of weeks continue. I think that we're going to be hearing an announcement from government based on advice from Dr. Henry and her team that internal travel can begin. We have a Destinations BC has been working on a very aggressive marketing plan that's ready to go. It's in the can. As soon as we get the high sign from Cabinet through advice from Dr. Henry, we'll be saying to British Columbians, let's go out and explore every corner of the province. And I know that some have said I'm focusing overly much on Barkerville, but there's a whole host of places that people can go. Barkerville's just one of many places. Fort Steele would be on that list as well. And of course, Goldstream Park, just down the street from my home. There's limitless places to go in British Columbia to experience some recreation, some relaxation. And I can't wait to give the thumbs up to British Columbians to start moving around. We've already taken steps to ensure that British Columbians get first priority when it comes to accessing our provincial campgrounds. And I think that it's only a matter of time before we can say, let's go out and explore BC. Let's make sure we're supporting those small local businesses in every corner of the province.
Next, we have a question from Tanya Fletcher.
Hi, Premier. On that note, the Nutella Tribal Council passed a motion yesterday saying they will not permit outside visitors on their territory. Of course, it spans 300 kilometers along the west coast of Vancouver Island, and that's unless health authorities meet specific conditions to guarantee the health and safety of their members against COVID. The conditions include setting up contact tracing, screening, and testing. So is the province willing to work with them or any other communities to meet those specific conditions?
Certainly we are, and I can say to my my friends in the Chalmette territory, which includes part of my constituency, Port Renfrew, where the Pacheedaht traditional territory is. They're Chalmette peoples. We've been working cooperatively with Indigenous peoples from the beginning, and Indigenous health authorities, First Nations health authority, to make sure that information, when we get it, is shared as widely as possible. I think certainly British Columbia is doing well. Vancouver Island hasn't had an active case in over a month, and I think that should give some comfort to the Chalmette. But I absolutely understand their anxiety, and that anxiety is not just with Indigenous peoples. There are communities in British Columbia that are still uneasy about inviting and welcoming people from away. But if we're going to talk about tourism on one hand and isolation and closing communities with the other, we're going to have an impasse. And our approach has been to try and find the best way to make sure we're meeting all of the tests. The test of protecting public health, the test of protecting Indigenous communities, but also providing opportunities for economic activity so people can pay their bills and put food on the table.
Our next question is from Rob Buffum.
Well, hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question. My question also relates to tourism. I spoke to Destination Victoria today that characterized the situation as dire and at times of the essence. I'm wondering if you're able to give a more specific answer in terms of when the industry can expect a plan, and even more so, I'm interested in your thoughts on just the gist of what that plan may be. I know you've spoken about marketing, but for a lot of people, the idea of a staycation or staying here is the only option anyway, so the importance of marketing may not be as big as other things. I'm wondering if you can share with us whether that plan might include some kind of financial things, whether it's low interest loans or interest-free loans for these businesses that are being hit so hard. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There are a range of incentives and initiatives that have been put in place by the federal government and by the province to assist businesses of all stripes, of all kinds, in all parts of the province, and in fact, from Canada's perspective, right across the country. And we're going to continue to focus on tourism because it's so fundamental to the BC economy, particularly here in the Lower Island and on Vancouver Island. But I do believe that a marketing plan is critical, and a sense of comfort and peace and safety is critical within the traveling public. British Columbians need to get out, stretch their legs, go to other places, but they're not feeling particularly comfortable about that just yet. We've had great results in BC, but when you look at other parts of the country, in fact, when you look just south of us in Washington, Oregon, and California, we've seen a spike in cases. As we've been going down, they've started to dial back up again. And with the unrest and the large gatherings that are putting at risk countless people, I think we'll see an increase in the number of cases south of the border, which means we're going to remain absolutely vigilant on keeping our borders closed until adjoining communities have better results when it comes to managing COVID-19. Saying no to U.S. tourists in Victoria is a very difficult pill to swallow. I absolutely understand that, but I think the public is behind me on this. We want to make sure that our reopening is safe, and if that means we have to help businesses in other ways, we're absolutely prepared to do that. We have $1.5 billion in recovery funding, not yet allocated. Obviously, the tourism sector is a key target of ours to make sure we get people moving around as quickly as we can within BC, and then those resources that we have at our disposal to help industries will be there, and we'll take it on a case-by-case basis.
The next question is from Glenn Korstrom.
Hi, Premier. Your government has said that it's working with the restaurant industry to make the sector viable, particularly given that you recently raised the minimum wage. And one way that they've been pushing is to be able to buy alcohol at a wholesale price, much like liquor stores do. And I'm hearing mixed things. A restaurant owner phoned me today to say that he'd heard that isn't on. So I just want you to address that. Is that something you're looking at still, or when can we expect it?
Yes, we are still looking at it. Minister Eby, who's responsible for the liquor distribution branch, took some immediate steps. You'll remember back to the beginning of the restrictions that were brought in place in March. The government acted swiftly at the recommendation of the Attorney General to make sure that restaurants who were doing takeout services could also provide off sales. That was a decision that we made literally in a number of days because it was so critical to the survival of those restaurants that were going to try and stay open by cultivating a takeout service. We've also encouraged communities, municipalities to move quickly on providing space in sidewalks for outside dining and outside hospitality, and we've seen some positive results there, some challenges in other places. And when it comes to the question that you've asked, Minister Eby has it on his agenda. It hasn't yet come to Cabinet, so no decision has been made. But I absolutely understand the challenges that the industry is facing, and we want to do everything we can to get outside of the box, get outside of the traditional obstacles that some in hospitality have highlighted for us. Minister Eby has been a good spokesperson for the sector, and he'll bring the issue forward, and we'll deliberate and make a decision shortly.
Next, we have a question from Joanna James.
Hi, Premier. Good afternoon. Many people are starting to refer to BC as Canada's New Zealand. This is a province that was first hit by COVID-19, but now is a leader when it comes to reduced cases and reopening. What are some of the reasons why BC has been able to keep case counts down and continue to push forward with reopening? For that.
Well, I know that all of my friends, to a person, think that PM Jacinda is the reason for all of the success in New Zealand, and I will echo that. We've been successful in British Columbia because largely Minister Dix and Dr. Henry started out well before this became a public emergency by informing the public of the challenges that we were facing. And people listened, people responded. And Dr. Henry fan clubs and the number of people who say to me how pleased they are with the direction the government has been going is really quite humbling. But it's not about us. We were given evidence. We followed the evidence, and the public responded. And I think the credit for the success in British Columbia has to go to the people of BC, because it would have been very easy to disregard Dr. Henry's objectives and the restrictions that she put in place. British Columbians didn't do that. In fact, some of the questions that I've been having today at this press conference speak to continued vigilance to make sure that there is no opportunity at all for further spread of COVID-19 in some communities like the Nachalna Territory, Haida Gwaii, and other Indigenous communities, as well as some border towns along the 49th parallel. So I think why we've been successful is British Columbians responded to the call from Dr. Henry. They've seen a positive result. Well, they've seen negative results in other places, and we need to stay the course. COVID-19 is in every corner of British Columbia. It is still a real and present threat to our well-being. We need to be vigilant. We need to continue to follow guidelines until such time as a vaccine is found.
Next, we have Richard Zisman.
Premier, you mentioned off the top moving into phase 3. Is there any sense of when that can happen? And you also mentioned TV and film. When do you expect that industry can get up and running? And are you concerned that Hollywood has already stated that they can start as early as June 12th, and we may not get a leg up as hoped on Hollywood?
Well, thanks for the question. And I've seen an increase in cases in California over the past number of days. I suspect because of the large gatherings that have taken place in California and, in fact, in many other states in the U.S., we're going to continue to see an increase in cases in California. So British Columbia will continue to be a place where health-conscious producers and directors and people who know about the inherent advantages of being in British Columbia, generous tax credits to be sure that entice the industry to come here, but a skilled workforce that is at the ready to take off. And that's what really attracts people here. It's the quality of the personnel. It's obviously the vistas. We have beautiful scenery, great sets, and that's been expanding over the past number of decades. We're going to continue to do that. I don't think we're at a disadvantage, quite frankly. I think we continue to have a competitive advantage because we've been focusing so hard on making sure that there is a gradual startup. Domestic production can be underway today. Foreign or international productions will require that front of camera talent to quarantine for 14 days. My understanding is the industry gets that. They respect that. And we're very much high on the list of places to come as soon as we give the high sign, which will be shortly. Dr. Henry is looking at the data every day, as you know, providing to the public as much information as she has at her disposal. And when we get to a position for us to move to phase 3, we'll do that as quickly as we can. The film sector has already put in place their operating procedures with WorkSafe and public health. It's just a matter of getting that high sign.
Next, we have a question from John Crawford.
Yes, Premier. Getting back to tourism, one of the big tourism drivers here in northwestern BC, as you know, is sports fishing, both in the fresh waters and tidal waters. And a lot of the the charter operators here in the Northwest are wondering, are they already able to recommence operations, or do they wait for Phase 3? And, of course, they're also concerned about the fact that normally in a normal year, a lot of the clientele would be coming from out of province, either from, Alberta or maybe from overseas. And obviously we're not going to be seeing that this year. So is there any help available for them?
Well, very good question, and there's a bunch of variables. Normally, on the charter side, we're always looking to Ottawa for what allocation decisions are they going to make with respect to Chinook and other sport fishing regulations, time frames, what areas are open, what areas are closed. If that's not enough pressure for these businesses to try and operate, put a pandemic on top of that restricts the ability of people to come from outside of our borders, that's a significant challenge, of course. And we're aware of that, and we're always trying to encourage as best we can these companies to try and reach domestic opportunities, get some people out in boats that have not been out in boats before. I know it's not just in the Northwest. In my community, Souk and Port Renfrew depend on a vigorous sport season for salmon, and that's been a challenge the past couple of seasons, and it'll continue to be a challenge because of the lack of fish. But you compound that by saying you've got a lack of fishers coming from other jurisdictions, and then, of course, the challenges of internal travel as well. But I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic that we'll have better news for the sport fishing sector around the corner. When it comes to other types of assistance, that's always an option. As I said, we have a recovery plan, dollars ready to go, and we'll be looking at that on a case-by-case basis, and the charter sector is certainly one of those that we'll be looking at closely.
Our next question is from Bruce Basu.
Hi, Premier. I have a couple questions. First off, I'm not sure if there was an announcement on this already, but are you extending the provincial state of emergency today? And second of all, is Vancouver the only city to host teams, or are other towns going to be part of the package, as previously mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have renewed for another 2 weeks the state of emergency, and that will be in place until Cabinet reconvenes, not next week, but the week after. Again, this is part and parcel of our making sure that we're putting public safety first, putting us in a position to better manage any challenges that may emerge. And I'm confident that as the summer proceeds, we'll see less and less requirement for the state of emergency. But we are coming out of the flood season and looking squarely in the face of fire season. So we'll see how that unfolds. With respect to the NHL Hub City proposal, when we first talked to the NHL, we were looking at a cross-British Columbia approach because of the benefits that would be found in Kamloops, Prince George, Victoria, Kelowna, other communities that have Western Hockey League rinks and, of course, the infrastructure to host teams. The NHL rejected that proposal and have gone to the Hub City model, where there will be one Western Conference city and one Eastern Conference city. And we're very proud that the Canucks persevered, put together a very solid plan, rigorous back and forth with their health and training staff and Dr. Henry and her team. And I think they've come up with a really solid package that protects players, puts the public interest front and center with respect to the quarantine, with respect to travel back and forth from hotels to the rink until such time as we get well into the summer. And I think that Vancouver has a very compelling case to make, and I support it wholly. But it will not include, the NHL plan no longer includes cities outside of Vancouver.
Our next question is from Sean Eckford.
Thank you. Mr. Premier, at the risk of coming off as the reporter who always asks the same question, I want to ask about BC Ferries, because although runs have been added to some routes that were cut, other routes are now learning that they will be cut soon, and there's concern that when all this is over sometime after Labor Day, service levels won't return to what they were before the pandemic. And can you offer any assurance to ferry-dependent communities that our service levels will be returning to what they were before the state of emergency?
I thank you very much for the question, and I absolutely understand the anxiety that coastal communities and ferry-dependent communities are feeling. I'm a born and raised islander. I know full well the importance of the BC ferry system. You will know, and the communities will know, that the former government in its early days changed the governance structure at BC Ferries, and the CEO and his team do not have to answer to cabinet. They answer to a board of directors, and the province is the singular shareholder, but the relationship sometimes is inconsistent with the best public outcome versus the best outcome for the ferry corporation. And that's been a constant tussle since we were sworn in as a government. Minister Trevena, who is also multiple island dependent, living on an island, a smaller island, and then commuting to the larger island to come to the legislature, understands this very well. And we've been working as cooperatively as we can through finance, through Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, to protect as many routes as we possibly can. That involves a transfer of resources from the Crown, the province, to the company, and that will likely continue. We need to see these ridership return, and when that happens, how that happens, depends on a whole bunch of factors that are at this point out of our control. But I want to make a commitment to you today that I understand the importance of ferries to ferry-dependent communities. We campaigned on strengthening that relationship. We've made some changes to the Coastal Ferries Act. We'll make more changes as needed to ensure that we can continue to have the traveling public comforted that those services will be there for them when they need them.
And our last question today goes to Keith Baldry.
Hi, Premier. Thank you for this. Just again on tourism, given that we have literally millions of visitors to BC every year, primarily from the United States, how realistic is it to really expect or hope that just local tourists can sort of fill what obviously is going to be an enormous gap in the summer?
Well, you're absolutely right. Domestic travel will not fill the void of international travel. I had a very long discussion with the CEO of Air Canada, and they're hemorrhaging enormous amounts of money every day, not just because of their operations here in British Columbia, but across the country and indeed around the world. And it's not just British Columbia that's closed its borders. It's not just British Columbians who are tentative about having people come from away. This is an international phenomenon. It is a global pandemic. And I think it's important to remind listeners and readers and those who are watching right now that these are unprecedented times that require extraordinary measures by a whole host of people, not just in government, but in business and civil society and right across the board. And I do understand the impact that a lack of international travelers will have on the tourism sector, but I can't wish those travelers to appear, and I will not limit the border restrictions that are in place until such time as I can guarantee the public health of British Columbians. And I think tourist operators understand that, and British Columbians certainly do. But that doesn't mean we're turning our back on the sector. I'm trying to get people to travel around, to go to places like Barkerville and others, and I'm confident that people will do that when they get the opportunity. And that's showing support for British Columbia, for BC companies, for BC attractions that are so envied by the rest of the world. We should take advantage of it ourselves this summer to try and fill some of that gap. But I'm under no illusion. We will not be able to replace the countless travelers that come from the U.S. and internationally to enjoy British Columbia this summer. As Dr. Henry says, it's for now, it's not forever.
Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we have.
Thank you.